Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, so today we're going on a pretty incredible journey. We're going to trace how the global supply chain went from that absolutely devastating collapse back in 2021 to the highly regionalized future of global trade we're building today. I mean, we hear the word globalization thrown around constantly, right? But the reality of how the things you actually buy reach your doorstep? It's undergoing a massive, largely hidden transformation right now. Let's get into it.
To really understand this, we gotta look at the staggering scale of the crisis that kicked it all off. Think back to October 2021. Off the coast of Southern California, the global economy basically just ground to a shuddering halt. At that exact moment, nearly 13% of the entire world's container fleet was paralyzed, just floating aimlessly outside ports around the globe. And because of this historic traffic jam, upward of $1 trillion worth of goods was quite literally trapped at sea.
But this wasn't just some abstract macroeconomic blip. It was a deeply personal crisis for so many of us. Suddenly, you just couldn't find basic necessities. We're talking toilet paper, medical gear, baby formula. Author Peter Goodman actually anchors this visceral reality with a quote from his wife, Deanna. She gave birth right during the height of the lockdowns and was facing these completely empty digital storefronts for basic baby supplies. She said, "All we thought to wish for was a healthy baby. And now he's here, but the world has fallen apart." That really captures the emotional toll of a totally broken system, doesn't it?
Section 1. The Supply Chain Disruption. Let's look closer at what was actually happening out on the water. Off the twin ports of LA and Long Beach, this mysterious bottleneck created a truly bizarre reality. Take the Marsk Imden, for example. This is a Danish container ship longer than 4 Statues of Liberty, and it was just stuck out there holding thousands of containers. And if you look at the cargo across that whole stranded flotilla, it's mind-boggling. We're talking 7.3 million pounds of canola meal pellets meant for starving American cows, 13 million pounds of Fiji water, 17 million pounds of Heineken beer, and nearly 30,000 pounds of cornhole game equipment. It even trapped a startup's pivotal holiday shipment of light-up Sesame Street bath toys. So literally everything from vital agricultural feed to Elmo was completely inaccessible.
Which brings us to Section 2, the cult of efficiency. How exactly did we get here?
To really grasp the root cause of all this fragility, we have to look at the philosophy that governed global business for decades. It's called just-in-time manufacturing. For years, multinational companies operated with this almost cult-like reverence for cost-cutting. So instead of keeping backup parts in local warehouses, they relied entirely on a ruthlessly efficient real-time web of container ships and, honestly, overworked transportation networks. And sure, this freed up tons of cash to lavish on shareholders, but it left the global system with absolutely zero margin for error. None.
And that leads to this massive post-pandemic pivot we're seeing today. When the pandemic hit, the extreme fragility of just-in-time was perfectly exposed. Now, businesses are basically being forced to transition toward a just-in-case model. They're finally recognizing that, hey, spending a little more on warehousing, building up some local inventory, and creating robust safety nets, that's literally the only way to survive the next inevitable global shock.
All right, moving to Section 3. The reality of regionalization. Because fixing the supply chain isn't just about building bigger warehouses. It actually requires a massive shift away from pure globalization toward regionalization. Take the cautionary tale of Akron, Ohio. Back in the mid-20th century, Akron was the rubber capital of the world, right? They churned out 60% of the globe's tires. But by the 1980s, the industry there had completely collapsed. And why? Well, it wasn't just about cheap overseas labor. It was because Akron tried to go it alone. While European and Asian tire makers were building these highly integrated supply chains with their geographic neighbors, U.S. companies lacked regional partners. And without a broader North American network to fall back on, Akron just couldn't compete with those highly regionalized machines in Europe and Asia.
And the data today tells that exact same story. The global economy isn't actually truly global at all. Over 2/3 of Europe's trade and over half of Asia's trade stays entirely within their own respective regions. The economies that are winning right now are the ones that deeply integrate with their neighbors to form powerful, self-sustaining manufacturing hubs.
To make this tangible, let's look at how this builds a resilient product today. Take the Ford Edge. The seats start in Tennessee, the fabric comes from South Carolina, embellishments from Mexico, and they're all attached to frames in Canada. It's complex, sure, but it's a highly contained North American dance. And on the flip side, China's Haval H6 SUV pulls its transmissions, chassis, and bumpers from Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Modern manufacturing absolutely thrives on these tightly knit, regional supply chains, rather than wildly flung global ones.
This perfectly tees up Section 4, greener global value chains.
So as these regional hubs solidify, the massive shift toward electric vehicles, or EVs, is suddenly exposing an entirely new vulnerability. Unlike your traditional gas car, EV batteries rely on a shockingly concentrated supply of critical minerals. In 2023, global battery manufacturing consumed 85% of the world's lithium and 70% of its cobalt. Think about that. If one region controls those minerals, it creates a massive choke point. So diversifying where these minerals actually come from is now, without a doubt, an urgent priority for these global manufacturing hubs.
And there's another fascinating layer here, too. Regionalization directly impacts the environmental promise of these vehicles. Making an EV battery actually emits significantly more CO2 upfront than making a gas-powered car, meaning an EV only becomes truly green over time, but the differences are wild. In the United States, an EV offsets its production emissions in just 1.7 years, but in China, it takes 5.7 years, and in Japan, 7.6 years. Why? Because the environmental benefit of an EV is completely, 100% dependent on how clean the specific energy grid of its regional hub actually is.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Rewiring for the Future.
Look, with supply chains dictating our access to everything from basic medicine to advanced green technology, governments are no longer leaving this up to chance. Since the 2020 disruptions, we've seen an absolutely unprecedented explosion in government intervention. According to recent trade data, governments around the world have deployed over $2 trillion globally. This massive surge in industrial policy is laser-targeted at securing local access to semiconductors, clean energy, and those critical minerals we were just talking about. Governments are actively paying to redraw the supply chain map.
And the way these countries negotiate with each other is evolving really fast, too. Traditional trade deals, those were massive, slow, economy-wide agreements mostly focused on just reducing tariffs. But today, we're seeing the rapid rise of what are called targeted trade deals, or TTDs. There are already over 185 of these in place globally. They're fast, they're flexible, and they focus on very specific, critical sectors like digital data or minerals. And these targeted agreements are proving they can boost trade in crucial sectors by up to 12%, which allows countries to rapidly secure their most essential regional supply chains.
But here's the really interesting part. In this newly fragmented, highly regionalized world, a totally new type of winner is emerging: the connector economies. Countries like Vietnam, Mexico, Turkey, and the ASEAN nations are just perfectly positioned right now, because instead of global trade completely stopping due to tariffs or geopolitical friction, these connector economies are acting as strategic bridges. Multinational companies are literally rerouting their trade and investments through these specific hubs just to maintain access to different regional blocks. So, we've seen how the fragile, hyper-efficient systems of the past completely failed us. And we're seeing how this new era of regional hubs, strategic minerals, and connector economies is being built from the ground up to replace it. So I want to leave you with this to think about today. As you look around your home, or your driveway, or even your pantry, which of your daily purchases are still relying on a fragile, vulnerable global web, and which are being built by the newly resilient regional networks of the future? Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep questioning how the world around you is put together.